The Attorney General is supporting calls by the Guyana Bar Association for the Constitution to be amended to end deadlock over the appointment of a Chancellor and a Chief Justice. Guyana is working on getting COVID vaccines for young children. Regionally, the CARICOM Secretary General says the removal of correspondent banking relationships can hurt the region. A former Colombian soldier has told a U.S. court that he played no role in the assassination of Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse. And internationally, we go to the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine for the latest through the BBC. The news comes to you with the compliments of Kentucky Fried Chicken KFC.
Is it a special occasion? Are you on a budget but still want a filling and also mouth-watering meal? Look no further. KFC is here for you at 9 locations and 6 drive-thrus, including the Amazonia Mall at Providence, which now delivers from Shore Base to Little Diamond. Call 632-0533, 6080-162, or 503-3591. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
And now the details of today's news. The Guyana Elections Commission has informed House Speaker Manzur Nadir that Aubrey Norton and Volley Lawrence are now parliamentarians. Chief Election Officer Vishnu Prasad informed Mr. Nadir that this follows the selection of the names of Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence by the representative of the list of a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change. Mr. Prasad also informed the House Speaker that a GCOM chairman has been asked to issue certificates of elections to Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence. When the National Assembly meets next week, Wednesday, Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence will take the oaths of a new member. Based on internal decisions taken by the People's National Congress Reform and a Partnership for National Unity, Mr. Norton is expected to be voted in by his parliamentarians to become Guyana's opposition leader. He'll succeed Mr. Joseph Harmon, who has resigned from the National Assembly from March 15. Mr. Norton says Ms. Lawrence will be responsible for finance in the opposition's shadow cabinet. Attorney General Alan Landela is backing calls by the Guyana Bar Association GBA for a change in the constitutional method for the appointment of a substantive chancellor and a chief justice. Since the constitution was amended in 2011, successive opposition leaders have refused to approve the president's choices for a permanent chancellor and a chief justice. Noting that a constitutional reform process has started, he stayed clear of suggesting what the new formula should be, but stressed that every effort should be made to break the gridlock mechanism.
Here you have had deadlock now for 22 years, 2 decades. I don't think we need more lessons. We have 22 years of experience. So when we start the constitutional reform process, I hope we would be guided by these real examples and don't make fanciful recommendations, idealistic and unreal recommendations.
The Attorney General notes that the Constitution provides for the appointment of an acting chancellor and a chief justice if the opposition leader refuses to approve the president's nominees. Ahead of his expected emergence as opposition leader, Mr. Aubrey Norton says the coalition of a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU-AFC, plans to file requests for information under the Access to Information ATI legislation. Mr. Norton says this is part of a plan to ensure there is accountability by the People's Progressive Party civic-led administration.
I do believe that we need to make more use of the Freedom of Information Act and begin to, through the Parliament, demand more information from this government, which seems to be obsessed with lack of transparency and lack of accountability. And we will have to take action to ensure that they understand the need to be both transparent and accountable.
He added that picketing and protests have not been ruled out. The Commissioner of Information is retired Justice Charles Ramsden. There have been concerns that Guyanese at large, as well as media houses and specialized interest groups, have not been maximizing the use of the Commissioner of Information since the Access to Information Act was passed in 2011. Guyana is making efforts to obtain COVID vaccines for children 5 to 11 years old. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony made the announcement while receiving several ambulances, equipment to measure oxygen levels in persons, and mobile ultrasound machines. Those equipment and other items were donated by Japan and procured by the United Nations. Dr. Frank Anthony.
We have been working with partners to make sure that we can get access to the vaccines for the age groups 11 to 5. So this is an ongoing discussion we are having, and we are hoping that we can conclude those soon so that we can get the vaccines for 11 to 5.
The health minister hopes that the vaccination rate among older children can increase.
Another area that we are working on is to make sure that the children between 12 to 17, that we can increase the vaccination rates, because for first dose we're just about 47% or 47.1%, I think it was, and that needs to be increased.
Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony. And in news just coming to hand, citing several complaints about the quality of internet service, Prime Minister Mark Phillips today asked the Public Utilities Commission to set quality of service benchmarks for providers to abide by. In a letter to PUC Chairman Attorney-at-Law Della Britton, Prime Minister Mark Phillips asked that steps be taken to amend the Telecommunications Consumer Protection Regulations 2020 at a minimum quality of service parameters for availability, packet loss ratio, that's upload and download, average throughput for packet data, latency, and jitter. He said that he would soon check back with the PUC about the requested and required procedures to put those parameters in place, due with the aim of addressing concerns by subscribers. He says the Guyana government is extremely concerned at numerous reports of poor quality of public telecommunications services, especially with respect to fixed and mobile broadband internet service. He says he has been advised that the institution of appropriate technical quality of service standards is a necessary part of the solution to the issue. The problems that he hopes the quality of service standards will be able to resolve are service outage, such as inability to place calls or dropped calls at the start of an outage, dropped connections such as waiting for a retransmission, dropped calls and buffering, delay between the person speaking and the other party hearing, and jerky freezing and stop and start of videos. Guyanese can once again travel to Japan as that Asian nation has lifted its travel ban on 106 countries. Japan had imposed a ban several months ago at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. But today, the Japanese government said that from April 8, Guyanese and nationals from 105 other countries can once again travel to that country. They include 9 of the 15 member states of the Caribbean Community CARICOM, as well as neighboring Brazil and Venezuela. Turning to news now from the region, the leader of the Barbuda People's Movement, parliamentarian Trevor, says that Prime Minister Gaston Brown is attempting to dilute the voting process on the sister island. On the weekend, Mr. Brown gleefully announced that Mr. Trevor Walker is on his way out, since the Antiguans working in Barbuda will be registered there and will not be voting for Walker. However, the Barbuda People's Movement BPM leader says his party has been closely monitoring the voters list and the daily registration to ensure that is in keeping with the law. Based on the BPM's vigilance, Walker says the situation in Barbuda is quite normal at present, and he sees nothing to support the Prime Minister's claims. According to the law, Legal residents are allowed to register to vote at age 18. However, to qualify to vote in any constituency, a person must be an ordinary resident in that constituency for 6 months. Based on this requirement, Walker says persons cannot just rent a house and then 2 months following decide to get registered to vote in that constituency. The Barbuda seat has proven difficult for the Antigua Labour Party over the years. While it captured the seat in 2014 when Arthur Nibbs ran its ticket, he was unable to retain it in the elections of 2018. This time, Prime Minister Brown says he is confident that with Antiguans voting in Barbuda, Senator Ned will ensure a Labour Party victory on the sister island. A former Colombian soldier pleaded not guilty on Monday to charges by U.S. prosecutors that he conspired to commit murder or kidnapping outside the United States in connection with the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. The U.S. Justice Department in January said Mario Palacios was part of a plan initially designed to kidnap Moïse that evolved into an assassination plot after conspirators were unable to find a plane to take Moïse out of Haiti. Palacios' attorney Alfredo Ezwaguirre, in a brief hearing in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida, entering the not guilty plea, and later told reporters that Palacios was not aware of what was being planned. The lawyer said his client is simply a soldier who was taken from Colombia to Haiti, and the entire operation was orchestrated by other persons. Moïse was assassinated at his residence in Port-au-Prince on July 7, 2021. He was shot 12 times. Haiti's National Police say Palacios was part of a 5-man group known as Delta Team that entered Moïse's bedroom to gun him down. The other 4 members of that group are in Haitian custody. The U.S. Justice Department says Palacios was detained in Jamaica in October and was being deported to Colombia in January when he agreed during a layover in Panama to travel to the United States instead. The United States has become increasingly involved in Moïse's murder investigation as part of a probe by the Caribbean nations' authorities. Haitian and Chilean citizen Rodolphe Jarre has been charged in the United States, and former Haitian Senator Jean Joel Joseph, who was arrested in Jamaica in January, may face extradition to the United States. The Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, Dr. Carl Barnett, on Wednesday warned that global rules against financial crimes can drive Caribbean businesses into the black market. A number of Caribbean countries have been blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force because they have not done sufficient to counter money laundering, financing of terrorism, and tax evasion. But the CARICOM Secretary General says these changes need to be properly studied as they can force businesses to engage in unregulated practices.
The uncertainties and the actual loss of correspondent banking relations is likely to be driving legitimate business on the ground. When the formal financial markets cannot work, business resort to informal markets to survive.
Dr. Barnett says that when banks in the Caribbean lose correspondent relationships with their counterparts in other parts of the world, businesses will prefer to keep their foreign exchange overseas. She says this can put greater strain on economies in the Caribbean.
The threat of loss of access to the international banking system can lead exporters of goods and services to keep as much of their foreign exchange earnings abroad as possible in order to be able to ensure ready access to foreign exchange when they need. This would have the effect of reducing the flow of export earnings into our economies. These two results of international de-risking practices, therefore, may well result in the expansion of the informal sector and increase the likelihood of macroeconomic instability, thereby increasing some of the very risks that we are seeking to mitigate.
The CARICOM Secretary General also told the opening of the Caribbean Regional Risk Conference that this can see the region losing some of its social and economic achievements. Hundreds of indigenous people began gathering in the Brazilian capital for a 10-day protest camp to defend their land rights and oppose a government bill in Congress that will allow mining and oil exploration on their reservations. Organizers are hoping to gather 7,000 people from 200 of Brazil's 305 tribes to press Congress not to pass legislation proposed by far-right President Jair Bolsonaro that would open their protected lands to commercial mining and agriculture. The head of Brazil's main indigenous umbrella organization, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples, Sonia Guajara, vows not to give up her rights. Her organization represents most of Brazil's 900,000 indigenous people. Warriors in feathered headdresses, with their bodies painted with the black and red dyes of Amazon fruit seeds, danced, chanting ritual songs as they put up tents on the grassy esplanade next to government ministries in central Brasilia. Bolsonaro has said indigenous people have too much land, holding up the development of the country, and vowed not to recognize an inch more of reservation lands. Environmentalists say the reservations save the rainforest from destruction. Hundreds of indigenous people began gathering in the Brazilian capital on Monday for the 10-day protests. Organizers are hoping to gather 7,000 people from 200 of Brazil's 305 tribes to press Congress not to pass the legislation. And now we go to the BBC World Service for the latest bulletin of international news.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. The United States and Britain have imposed new sanctions against major Russian banks and more members of the country's elite in response to alleged Russian atrocities in Ukraine. Sberbank, Russia's largest, will have its assets frozen in the US and the UK. President Putin's 2 adult daughters are among the individuals newly targeted by Washington. President Biden said responsible nations were coming together to hold the perpetrators of mass killings in the Ukrainian town of Bucha accountable.
Just in 1 year, our sanctions are likely to wipe out the last 15 years of Russia's economic gains. And because we've cut Russia off from importing technologies like semiconductors and encryption security and critical components of quantum technology that they need to compete in the 21st century, we're going to stifle Russia's ability and its economy to grow for years to come.
The BBC has heard fresh allegations of war crimes committed by Russian forces in the towns and villages surrounding the capital Kiev. Residents of Obuchovichi said on March the 14th they'd been rounded up at gunpoint by drunken Russian soldiers and forced into the local school to deter Ukrainian artillery. Here's Jeremy Bowen.
Around 150 civilians, including the elderly and small children, were marched to the local school. They were held in the school's gymnasium, which they said was freezing cold. In every part of the area, which has been largely cut off by mined roads and blown-up bridges, civilians speak of other abuses by Russian soldiers. A priest was shot dead. Men were held in the open, often bound and blindfolded for weeks, subjected to fake executions. The evidence that Russian forces repeatedly broke the laws of war to which their country is a signatory is accumulating.
Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk has called on people living in the eastern regions of Kharkiv, Luhansk and Donetsk to evacuate while they have the chance. It comes amid fears that Russian forces are regrouping to intensify their ongoing offensive there, though Western military officials have told the BBC they've yet to see a mass redeployment of Russian forces to the east. Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal has told the BBC he believes Russia wants to erase the Ukrainian nation from the face of the earth and that genocide is the only possible explanation for the atrocities seen in recent days in the town of Bucha.
I can't even imagine that these terrible things could happen in the 21st century in my country, near of Kyiv, and it's just terrible feelings from inside. And I think every person who will see these photos, these video pictures, will change its mind of thinking, of understanding Russians' crime here in Ukraine.
Mr. Shmyhal said he hoped what he called the terrible crimes would lead the rest of the world to support Ukraine more strongly. World News from the BBC. A protester has been killed and several people have been injured in clashes with police in Peru, where demonstrations against the rising cost of fuel and food are continuing. The incident occurred near Ica in the south of the country, where farm workers and lorry drivers have been blocking a major highway. President Pedro Castillo has been trying to calm nationwide protests by increasing fuel subsidies. The European Union's General Court has ruled that EU sanctions against the family of the late Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak were unlawful. This ends a 10-year legal battle over assets which could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. Sebastian Usher reports.
Gamal Mubarak, once seen as the likely successor to his father Hosni, hailed the decision, saying the family had suffered what he called enormous reputational harm over the designations by the EU. The decision today is essentially a confirmation of previous rulings at the EU General Court, which had already lifted all sanctions imposed up to 2018. The key element was a submission by the EU Council that it had relied on two specific judicial proceedings in Egypt that were found to be in violation of fundamental rights.
Last month saw a marked drop in the average extent of sea ice in the Antarctic. An EU research programme, the Copernicus Climate Change Service, said the extent of the ice in March was 26% below the average figure for the same month over the past 30 years. It was also at its second lowest level for this time of year in the 44 years since satellite records began. The social media website Pinterest is banning content which distorts or denies the existence of man-made climate change. The move follows a UN report that highlighted the need for governments to combat climate disinformation. Pinterest's definition of climate disinformation includes inaccurate posts about natural disasters and extreme weather events, as well as misrepresentations of climate science data. BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
On the go and need to grab a quick bite, but tired of the same dreary food? Well, KFC is here to brighten your day with a delicious, mouth-watering meal with their 9 convenient locations: Movie Town, Vicingen Road, Mandela Avenue, Regent Street, Stabrook, Hinks Street, Redenhoop, Parika, and the Amazonia Mall, now open from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. And they're there to welcome you every day. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
And now in the news, a recap of the highlights. The Attorney General is supporting calls by the Guyana Bar Association for the Constitution to be amended to end deadlock over the appointment of a Chancellor and a Chief Justice. Guyana is working on getting COVID vaccines for young children. Regionally, the CARICOM Secretary General says the removal of correspondent banking relationships can hurt the region. A former Colombian soldier has told a U.S. court that he played no role in the assassination of Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse. The news came to you with the compliments of Kentucky Fried Chicken KFC.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.
News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM with the accent on good Guyanese radio.
The time 18 hours 23.
For the toughest jobs, there's only one original motor oil, Valvoline, powering the world's heavy-duty engines in every corner of the world. You can trust the super protection of the original to keep your business moving forward. Valvoline, the original that never stops improving. Distributed by Swiss Machinery, Eccles Public Road. Telephone 233-3821 or 2495 or WhatsApp 691-1732.
We now join the BBC World Service in London.
It's premature to say that a deal has been done. Islander said that Ten Hag is now the favoured candidate amongst senior figures at Old Trafford, with the choice having narrowed to him or